All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm Kevin DeAnna. If you can't already tell from my disgusting accent, I am not actually a native Virginian. I'm something of a copperhead, if not a carpetbagger. But I've been in Virginia or either West Virginia my entire life. I'm a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, same school as Thomas Jefferson, and I did see the last remnants of Virginia as a southern state, including at my college. William and Mary in my time still had some nods to its Confederate past, at least, before the Yankees burned the entire campus down. When I graduated, you still walked by a plaque dedicated, quote, to the memory of the professors and students who left the College of William and Mary in May 1861 and in patriotic devotion fought in defense of the Confederate States of America. Well, they got rid of that in 2015. They got rid of the college mace, which was this symbolic trinket they would carry around because that had a Confederate flag on it. Now they're ripping themselves apart over slavery because of the affirmative action student contingent. And at some point, they're going to have to blow a bunch of money to play some back activists. This is why I don't donate to my school, because it's just going to go to some black activists. And the college is just like every other stupid school in the country now. I mean, you're just going to be studying the gender dynamics of video games or whatever else. There's no culture, there's no history, there's no tradition. And this is happening everywhere. And this is more broadly happening to the entire state. It wasn't that long ago Richmond still had Monument Avenue. It was a more or less reliable red state. It was considered the buckle of the Bible Belt. And Virginia, perhaps more than any other state in the Union, except maybe Texas, had a real sense of itself. Like it was a country unto itself, essentially until the Civil War, and maybe after. And you could still honor that heritage.
I'm told you're descended from an illustrious military family.
Who told you that? Kemper?
He tells me it was your uncle who defended Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, and that he was therefore the guardian of the original Star-Spangled Banner. I must say, I do appreciate the irony of it all.
Colonel Fremantle, it does not begin or end with my uncle or myself. We're all sons of Virginia here. That major out there commanding the cannon, that's James Deering, first in his class at West Point before Virginia seceded. And the boy over there with the color guard, that's Private Robert Tyler Jones. His grandfather, the President of the United States. The colonel behind me, that's Colonel William Aylett. Now, his great-grandfather was the Virginian Patrick Henry. It was Patrick Henry who said to your King George III, "Give me liberty or give me death." There are boys here from Norfolk, Portsmouth, small hamlets along James River, from Charlottesville and Fredericksburg, and the Shenandoah Valley. Mostly they're all veteran soldiers now. The cowards and shirkers are long gone. Every man here knows his duty. They would make this charge even without an officer to lead them. They know the gravity of the situation and the mettle of their foe. They know that this day's work will be desperate and deadly. They know that for many of them, this will be their last charge. But not one of them needs to be told what is expected of him. They're all willing to make the supreme sacrifice to achieve victory here. The crowning victory and the end of this war. We are all here, Colonel. You may tell them when you return to your country that all Virginia was here on this day.
Incidentally, that clip was from Gettysburg. In another movie made about the Civil War, made by that director, Robert Maxwell, Gods and Generals, you had Republican Senator George Allen dressed as a Confederate officer. This wasn't that long ago. Well, he was then defeated by a Democrat, Jim Webb. Well, what was Jim Webb's stance on the Confederacy? Oh, this was from Politico way back when. Webb's rebel roots and affinity for the Confederacy. Webb is no mere student of the Civil War era. He's an author too, and he's left a trail of writings and statements about one of the rawest and most sensitive topics in American history. He has suggested many times that while the Confederacy is a symbol to many of the racist legacy of slavery and segregation, for others it simply reflects Southern pride. In a June 1990 speech in front of the Confederate Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, posted on his personal website, he lauded the rebels' gallantry, which he said is still misunderstood by most Americans. Webb, a descendant of Confederate officers, also voiced sympathy for the notion of state sovereignty, as it was understood in the early 1860s, and seemed to suggest that states were justified in trying to secede. Most Southern soldiers viewed the driving issue to be sovereignty rather than slavery, he said. Love of the Union was palpably stronger in the South than in the North before the war, just as overt patriotism is today, but it was tempered by a strong belief that state sovereignty existed prior to the Constitution and it had never been surrendered. Webb expanded on his sentiments in his well-received 2004 book, Born Fighting: How the Scots-Irish Shaped America, which portrays the Southern cause as at least understandable, if not wholly laudable, unquote. And this was a Democratic presidential candidate. This was both parties in Virginia, not that long ago. Now what is Virginia? It's California. It's just colder. But you could see it change very quickly, and really it was the war on terrorism, the growth of the federal government after 9/11. You had Arlington and Alexandria in Northern Virginia. They were still recognizably Southern cities, even 20 years ago. But that changed very quickly because two things happened. First, the government expanded dramatically, and so everybody was essentially replaced by federal workers, and of course the hangers-on around the federal government, including, by the way, Conservatism Inc. You have all these nonprofit staffers who are going there to fight for limited government, but of course their whole lives are dependent on the existence of the federal government. That's why they live there. The great compromise between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, where Jefferson gave Hamilton some concessions, and in return the capital will be located in the South, that's got to be one of the great own goals of history. Because now you have this hostile colony. It's really a tumor in what was once the greatest state. And it just spreads and spreads and just eats everything that's all around it and destroys everything. And of course, this leads us to the second problem, which is once you have this financial base, what do normie Republicans want to do? That's right. You got to get the Chamber of Commerce happy. So what do? You give all sorts of tax exemptions and special breaks and special benefits to all these multinationals. The businesses come in. What do? They start hiring foreigners. It's not like the locals get any of the jobs. And so the government workers and then these people also want the illegal immigrants to cut their lawns and look after their 1.5 kids and serve their third world slop at these stupid restaurants. So now your cities are either completely unaffordable, because the places that are actually good to live, you need to be on the government teat to afford it, or it's just a third world slum out of Honduras or something. Like, this is Northern Virginia. This is what it is now. It's just a wasteland. Now, it's a very rich wasteland, no doubt, if you're plugged in. But the whole purpose of this wealth is to isolate yourself from everybody else in the locality. It's basically an entire region wiped out within a generation for the people who used to live there. And this was under Republican leadership. This is when Virginia was reliably a conservative state. Now, a few years ago, Glenn Youngkin, Republican, won a surprise victory in the Virginia gubernatorial election. What did he do with this mandate? What do you think? He quibbled about the budget. He talked about taxes. He talked about the economy. He moved a couple things around. They made sure to replace the Robert E. Lee statue in the Capitol. They replaced it with some black lady you've never heard of who led some school strike to make sure the public schools are unusable for white kids today, which of course is another reason why housing in the state is such a nightmare, because you can't send your kids to the local schools because they're basically a zoo. Like, this is why your public school is a train wreck. Thank that girl, whoever she was. I mean, again, what is the purpose of American life? To avoid the consequences of the civil rights movement. Why do you need to make money? Why do you have to live where you live? Why do you have to work the job you work? Why do you have to jump through all these kinds of hoops? So you can enjoy the kind of public accommodations every single American took for granted before the civil rights movement destroyed the quality of life for normal people. And it was designed to do that. Of course, if the purpose of our lives is to escape the civil rights movement and escape the consequences of the civil rights movement, the purpose of modern liberalism is to cut off those escape routes, which brings us back to the current situation in Virginia. Now, we talked a lot about the race in Virginia over the last year. The Republican Party, in its infinite wisdom, decided to run some foreign black woman and a never-Trumper, so they got like the worst of both worlds. Of course, she loses, and she goes down to a catastrophic defeat. But though everyone is saying, look, this is why it happened, this is Virginia went blue because they put up a bad candidate, this was a winnable race and everything else, was it? I mean, there are bigger things at work here. The fact is, when Youngkin won, it was kind of a fluke. You have off-year elections in Virginia. 2021 was basically perfect because you had anger over the economy. You had resentment over everything that was done to us over COVID. You had peak woke 2020 still fresh in people's memories. So all the right-wingers were on the brink of just like frenzy. The actual Southern vote was really mad about what had been done to the monuments in Richmond and Charlottesville, the Southern monuments. You had moms in Northern Virginia going nuts because you had all these cases of school officials covering up trannies and bathrooms, including some pretty disturbing cases. And perhaps more importantly, Biden was in. So leftists, who, let's face it, are the high propensity voters, they're taking it easy. They think they've won. Trump's not there to scare them, so they stay home. And the Democrats were still expected to win. They were caught sleeping. And then you also had this tactical misstep that the Democratic activists did, where they tried to do this ridiculous thing where they said, Glenn Youngkin, I mean, this total pushover, agreed with the Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville. Except they had a black guy dressed up as one of these white supremacists in this ridiculous prank. And of course, everybody involved got doxxed as like Democratic operatives within about an hour. And real reporters, Washington Post, all these types, they're like, this is a very serious political activism. These are white supremacists rallying for the Republican. They take it seriously, but nobody else did. And of course, the whole thing falls apart within like a day. I mean, I hate to say this, but Trump not in the picture, that probably helped too. You didn't have the hysterical women and shit-lit boomers watching MSNBC all day. They're not in the picture. They're not coming out to vote. So when Youngkin won, it was kind of a fluke. So when you get in, you really have to use what power you have because you're not going to get it again. And what does he do? He doesn't do anything. It wasn't just him. The GOP almost controlled every branch of the government. They were within like 2,000 votes. They only needed one Democrat to vote for them to push through all these different reforms, including for voter ID and all these sorts of things. They didn't do any of it. National Party didn't do anything, no real agenda. Just kind of, we're giggling, we're moving things around, we're playing accountant. Here's the thing. Maybe you think Youngkin was a good governor because he saved you $10 on your utility bills or whatever over the course of a year. Doesn't matter. In a democracy, you are punished for being a good steward of resources. You are hated. There's no reason to do that in a democracy. I mean, I know this is like neo-reaction 101 to most of you guys, but this is reality. There's no point in seeking office if that's what you're going to do. But really, it's more than that. What really drives people to the polls, it's the desire to punish your enemies no matter what. One of my rules of politics, a common enemy is more useful to bind a movement together than a common friend or a common ideology. You don't vote for anyone. You vote against people. Kevin Phillips, author of The Emerging Republican Majority, said in 1968, the whole secret to American politics is knowing who hates who. Let's take it a step farther. The group that has a stronger force of hatred and that is less self-conscious and less self-aware about it is the side that's probably going to win. And yeah, if you're a leftist listening to this, you're going to say, well, this is projection. But I'm going to say, insofar as you can measure these things, leftists are more hateful. As I said on the last live stream, insofar as you can measure any of this kind of stuff, leftists are more likely to say they support political violence. They're more likely to say it's appropriate to rejoice at the death of a political opponent. After the death, the assassination, really, of Charlie Kirk, we saw normal people, nurses, teachers, government workers, just celebrating openly, without fear, knowing this was fine, knowing their friends and colleagues would be like, yes, you are right to feel that way. Now, you can quibble with me if you want on that. Maybe I'm just saying like, oh, my side is good and your side is bad. Fine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm an evil person. But there's also this. This was a very influential article from Presser. The left has an authoritarian problem but doesn't know it. Let me quote from this because this is pretty important. This isn't mere speculation. Our scientific data demonstrate this very clearly. In a national survey of over 5,000 Americans, we gave people a standard authoritarianism questionnaire and then afterwards asked them a simple question. Do you view yourself as a dogmatic and authoritarian person? Conservative Americans who scored high on the authoritarianism questionnaire had no problem saying, yes, I am authoritarian. But liberals were a different thing entirely. Not only were liberal authoritarians less likely than conservatives to accurately identify themselves as authoritarians when they were, in fact, authoritarian, but there was actually a negative correlation between left-wing authoritarianism, the reality, and liberals' willingness to identify as authoritarian, their own perception. That means that the more authoritarian liberals are, the less they believe they are authoritarian. Unquote. This is an advantage. I strongly recommend you read that article. And the thing to understand here, and this is something maybe the author didn't quite get, this is an advantage. This is a good thing in politics. The fact that we're honest about our own motivations actually cripples us to some extent. If you're of a certain type on the right, like I am, and you like someone who you wouldn't necessarily call totalitarian, like that would be a bit much, but it's fair to call him authoritarian. You're General Pinochet in Chile, Francisco Franco in Spain, Salazar in Portugal. No one's going to be like, oh, well, they're not authoritarian. You might offer a defense. You might be like, well, they did good things. They were the best option. Given the circumstances, this is what you needed to do. I still support them. But you're not going to deny what they were. I mean, even Napoleon here. Napoleon was many things, but he was not really a Democrat. He wasn't authoritarian. But if you're on the left, no one's going to be like, oh, Stalin or Mao. If people who like those people, they're going to deny they're actually authoritarian. They're going to say like, oh, they actually freed people, even if it's just straight up totalitarianism. If you're on the left and you're defending authoritarian practices, you're just going to say, this is what it means to be a good person. People will say things that there should be no enforcement of immigration laws. But then at the same time, they'll say, well, you need a vaccine passport to go to the grocery store. People will be like, well, stop and frisk policies, where you're searching people for guns on the street. That's evil. That's racist. That's fascist. But also, police should be able to kick down your doors to confiscate guns. And by the way, we should confiscate all guns. The same people who post on Facebook about book bans and about fascism and how you can't get 1984 anymore or something, even though it's available at every library, they are also the same people who think the government needs to do more to stop hate speech on the internet. Now, you and I are going to be like, oh, these are contradictions, but these don't even register. They don't even realize that they're a thing. And that's why they win. Their ignorance is actually strength. It's all just calculations of whom. Good and evil are downstream of that. Progressives just see it as a question of being a good person. They don't recognize any philosophical or metaphysical system underneath it. They don't think it through in depth. It's just common sense to them. And that is a huge advantage. The more you understand yourself, the less politically effective you are. Which brings us, of course, to Virginia. So, this is our new governor, Abigail Spanberger. Now, behold the image of the destroyer. And again, I know what you're thinking. I mean, this is like some Hunger Games type shit, right? I mean, like the way she's dressed and everything else. She's just this stereotype. I mean, this CIA liberal elitist who works these kind of unclear internationalist jobs her whole life, and now she's going to reign over us and let loose her pets to terrorize us. And incidentally, just in passing, Hunger Games is one of those things where it was meant to be kind of liberal coded when it came out. But when you actually think about it, like who's the ruling class of the Capitol in those movies and those books, it's this like effete, effeminate, degenerate ruling class obsessed with fashion and worthless celebrity culture. And they're opposed by these sort of downtrodden rednecks who know how to use weapons and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't exactly age well for their purposes, but here we are. And, this is who's governing us now. Now, of course, during the campaign, the press covered her as a moderate. The Wall Street Journal. Remember, anybody in the press is going to tell you the Wall Street Journal is conservative, strives to be the anti-Mondami. She's a moderate. But of course, the very first thing she does is sign a law ending state and local law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration law enforcement. Take a look.
And this executive order rescinds executive order number 47. State and local law enforcement should not be required to divert their limited resources to enforce federal civil immigration laws. It is a responsibility of federal law enforcement. Virginia state and local law enforcement officers must be able to focus on their core responsibilities, investigating crime and community policing.
Here we are, guys. This is it. This is Virginia now. This is the thing. People are out there being like, oh, why is President Trump doing all these raids? Why is ICE doing all these raids? I'll tell you why. He's not just raiding people for the sake of doing it. They're not arresting these people just for the sake of them being illegal. They're going after people who are convicted or accused of certain crimes, who have deportation orders, they have an active warrant. And you're going to say, well, if they're just going after the criminals, why do you need 30 dudes in tactical gear bursting into that place? Because the states and the cities won't give the people to federal law enforcement. Like, all you should have to do, and all that does happen in a state like Texas or Florida, is you just go to the jail and you pick them up. And that's the end of it. And there's no optics and there's no headlines. You just do it. It's common sense. But in these other states, they just let them go. They're that committed to keeping illegals in the country, even the violent criminals, especially the violent criminals. So then what do you have to do? Then ICE has to go in there and hunt through the whole city, and everybody screams, and the journalists talk about chaos, and hysterical women are jumping in front of the cars. Like, this is where we're at. And this is what's coming to Virginia now. And here's what else we have in Virginia now. We now have a chief diversity officer and director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, one Dr. Sesha Joy Moon. Again, I don't blame her for doing this. First thing you do, if you're serious about power, you fund full-time activists on your side with apolitical jobs that are basically an excuse for full-time activism. By the way, here are her pronouns. Mercifully, they are still she and her and hers. But, so much for the death of woke. Now, obviously, here in Virginia, one of the things that remaining actual Virginians are concerned about is hanging on to the monuments and the statues that we still have. Well, here's her praising the destruction of a statue by a lawless mob on the grounds that the mob was possessed by the ancestors.
The thing that's different about Richmond, those statues came down in a lot of different cities, but Richmond is the only place where the people brought down the first one.
Come on.
It wasn't the politicians, it wasn't an organization. The people one night the ancestors just took a hold and said, we're done here, and yanked that joint down and then threw it in the water. I mean, I was on IG like, oh, Richmond is going on right now.
You were so hyped. You wanted to get here so bad.
But I also recognize, like, when we do this work, everybody can't do all aspects of the work. Yeah. There's supposed to be a protester. There's supposed to be a policymaker. There's supposed to be a researcher. And I knew I couldn't join because I would compromise the lane that the ancestors assigned me to do the work. But I was over here, like, in full solidarity. I think Ease might be here. I was sending money for water, like, do that. I was proud of what was happening. But I say all that to say, that was the last time that, sometimes we code switch at work, and I said, I'm no longer doing it.
Well, I'm not a Southerner. Well, I don't like the Confederacy. Well, we shouldn't have those anyway. Okay, but it wasn't the Confederacy. It was Columbus, by the way. It was a Christopher Columbus statue. And again, if you're against Christopher Columbus, think it through. What you're really saying is that you think it's a bad thing that Christopher Columbus came to this country, which means that it's a bad thing that Europeans came here, which means that it's a bad thing that America existed at all. It's a pretty extreme position, but of course that is what they believe. And of course, all this kind of racial mysticism, like the ancestors and all this kind of stuff, this is all perfectly mainstream. Like, God forbid I get up here and talk about getting back to Hyperborea. God forbid I tell you that, like, we're going back to Agartha. Don't mind if I do. But the point is, you can talk like this. And you can go up there and say, like, oh, the ancestors are coming and we're possessed by the spirit of our ancestors and Africa is triumphing in North America. You can talk about this in insane ways. You can commit crimes on video, and you're going to be rewarded by state authorities. You're going to be given a job to tell other people what to do by a moderate, by somebody the conservative press is going to call a moderate. Yeah, that's power. That's what it actually looks like. And this is only the beginning. The Democrats in Virginia are moving to strip Republicans of basically all congressional representation. We've talked about this on the show before. Keep in mind, they were trying to do this thing in all these different states. Didn't happen in Indiana. The Republicans refused to go along with it. Why? It did not agree with their principles. It's not who we are. What is the greatest conservative principle? Losing and muttering sanctimonious rhetoric about what a good person and what a good Christian you are. Well, how did the Democrats act? I think Republicans won Indiana by 19 points last time. Virginia, Democrats won by 5. What do? They immediately move to consolidate total political power. Oh, and by the way, the Indiana Republicans, they needed an excuse, right? And they said, well, when people were pressing them, why didn't you go along with this thing like President Trump wanted? They say, well, we cut a deal with Maryland. And Maryland said they wouldn't remove their Republican seat if we didn't remove our Democratic seat. So it's a gentleman's agreement. So actually what we're doing is we're fighting for conservatives in Maryland. We're making sure there's still a Republican seat in Maryland. You probably know where this is ending. Yeah, the Maryland Democrats are moving to get rid of that seat. That's happening right now. No one could have predicted that. And look, people are, oh, well, I'm still a good person. Under my morality, like your morality is garbage and fake and gay. Under my morality, if you're doing more to take care of the interests of your constituents, the people who voted for you, the people who sacrificed for you, people who supported for you, you're actually a better person. It actually makes you a better person to secure power for your side. If you sacrifice power for the sake of people who hate you, you're a bad person. These good, principled conservatives in Indiana are being treated exactly as they deserve. They're being played for fools, and they deserve every bit of it. The problem is that they're dragging all of us down along with them. Now, to return to the Old Dominion, what is the situation in Virginia? Well, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Fox News says, the Virginia State Senate on Friday greenlit a constitutional amendment that would clear the way for the Democrat-controlled legislature to redraw the state's U.S. House maps ahead of this year's midterm elections. The move by state senators, following a similar vote on Wednesday in the state House, was the final step needed to send the amendment to Virginia voters. If the ballot measure is approved this spring, coming up soon, the legislature, rather than the current nonpartisan commission, would redraw the state's congressional maps through 2030. Virginia is the latest battleground in the ongoing high-stakes battle between President Donald Trump and Republicans versus Democrats to alter congressional maps ahead of November's elections. And Virginia Democrats, who currently control 6 of the state's 11 House districts, are aiming to draw up to 4 additional left-leaning seats. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee called Friday's development a critical step in giving Virginia voters the opportunity to ensure they have fair and equal representation in Congress. You gotta love the way they talk about this kind of stuff. Total power for our side. We're going to lock the other side completely out. And what do we call it? We call it being fair. We call it being equal. It's like when they racially discriminate against whites. And what do they call it? Equal opportunity. Now, what it actually means is that Republicans and rural voters will basically get no representation in Congress. But, this includes me, but why should they? Why should we? If you have power and you don't use it, to some extent, you deserve what you get. The ancient take on slavery is that if you were a slave, you deserved it because you were choosing it over an honorable death. And this is sort of the political equivalent. And why should Democrats feel bad? I mean, keep in mind the new attorney general is a guy who texted a Republican in the state legislature about how he wanted to see her colleagues' kids die because that's the only way to change some people's minds. And he won. Now, again, do you think he won because people, and again, we're talking about the Democrats, the high propensity voters. Do you think that people didn't know what they were supporting? No one knew what this was talking about? It was in all the newspapers, and these are the people who actually read the newspapers and watch the TV news. No, he won because the side that is more eager to inflict suffering on opponents wins. This is reality. Look for yourself. This is all the campaign was talking about. It didn't cost them anything. Do you think people somehow missed it? Or that they simply didn't care? Or maybe even that they quietly agreed? Now that's up to you. I don't want to mind read here. But either way, it wasn't enough to shift the election. And this is only the beginning. This is some of the legislation heading our way in Virginia. Here's a new bill. And again, because these people vote as a block, it's not a law yet, but because these people vote as a block, this will almost certainly get through. I'll skip to the good part. I'm not going to make you read all the fine print. Eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing for rape, manslaughter, assaulting a law enforcement officer, possession and distribution of child pornography, and all repeat violent felonies. Rape. Yeah, we're just not going to go after minimum sentencing for that. Remember in college, all the over-the-top screaming, oh, rapists need to be killed. We need to stop rape culture. It's a war on women. And then the Feminist Party gets in power and it's oh, he's such a bad boy. Just let him go. Yeah, this is where we're at. Why would you do this? You're probably asking. Well, because the whole point is to make sure that judges have unlimited power to let criminals they like, i.e. non-whites, go. So yeah, obviously, if you punch a cop, you're going to go to jail forever. If DeQuantavious Brown III, who has 32 prior convictions, hits a cop, they don't have to send him to jail. Why do we get all these headlines all around the country about guys who were convicted how many dozen times and then they're let go and they stab people? Because of stuff like this. Do you think they don't know that this is what they're enabling? Do you think it's just a total mystery? Or do they know, in fact, what kind of people they're putting on the bench and what kind of people they're letting go and who their constituents are and know what they're capable of? It's up to you. And of course, if this is what's happening at the state level, once they get at the national level, it'll be like this everywhere.
I'll be back. You can't keep the Democrats out of the White House forever. And when they get in, I'm back on the streets with all my criminal buddies.
What else do we have coming our way in Virginia? Well, we're going to reduce all the penalties for robbery, including robbery using firearms, so people who are ineligible for parole because they had multiple convictions, including the use of firearms to commit a robbery, they can get parole now. Isn't that interesting? But at the same time, you have all this anti-gun legislation tracked by the National Rifle Association's Institute for Legislative Action, which is going to make your life more difficult. Source here is News 2A. So what are we looking at? HB 1094 imposes a separate and additional 11% excise tax on all firearms and ammunition sales from the tax opposed by HB 919. So it's a tax on top of a tax. HB 700 creates a 5-day mandatory waiting period on the sale and transfer of firearms. HB 871 creates a mandatory storage requirement for homes where minors or prohibited persons are present. See if you can guess who that will be enforced against. HB 926 allows localities to prohibit outdoor shooting on private property unless certain conditions are met, including lot size requirements. HB 907 establishes punitive fines for federally licensed firearms dealers that do not strictly comply with the state security measures. So we're going to shut down the gun dealers. HB 969 establishes a Virginia Gun Violence Prevention Center with the stated goal of being, quote, the primary resource for research, best practices, and strategies for the implementation of firearm violence intervention, community-based intervention, and group violence intervention programs designed to reduce violence in communities, unquote. Now, what the hell is the point of that last one? This is actually the most important one. Again, this is you actually do politics. If you're serious, this is what politics is. What are you doing? You're getting the taxpayers to fund research for your side. Who do you think is going to staff this thing? And then you justify the things that you want to do anyway. You're paying the salaries for the activists on your side. Oh, community-based intervention, group violence intervention program designed to reduce violence in communities. No. It has nothing to do with reducing violence in communities. It is designed to give taxpayer-funded slush funds to community activists on your side. That is the point of doing this. And that is smart because they're serious. And the people who supposedly represent you are not serious. Again, look at the core of all of this stuff. Why would you possibly lessen the penalties and make specific changes to the law to let out people who you know are violent criminals, including people who are using firearms to commit robbery, while at the same time inventing penalties so you can arrest ordinary gun owners? Because the former are useful. They like those people better. They are constituents. They are part of a class of dependents who vote as a racial and ethnic bloc. You can count on them to support you. What are we? We are uppity tax slaves. We exist to be crushed. The whole point is to make life for us more expensive, more miserable, and eventually throw us in jail because our job is to pay for them. That is the reality of the political coalition. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. Politicians are going to do what is in their political interest. It is not that complicated. It has nothing to do with morality. It's simply following the incentives. It's right there. And of course, these criminals, they're going to be able to get out of jail more quickly now. One of the other bills being introduced is to ensure that judges cannot deny bail in most cases. Again, this is just pure anarcho-tyranny. People you know are going to get caught up in this, either because a violent criminal who did 20 previous things is going to be let go and they're going to commit a crime against them, or they're going to forget to dot their I or cross their T in some regulation. Their business is going to get shut down. They're going to get arrested. No one is actually opposed to a police state. You just want it directed against your political enemies. I can't put this in simpler terms, people. Well, if you're a Republican, we'll get them next time. We'll just win a future election. No, you won't. No, you won't. That doesn't work that way. What are they doing? Now, first, before we get into this is a prose law by Marcia Price, who, of course, wants to be called Sia. This is like Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, all these black women politicians. They need these cutesy nicknames. Anyway, The purpose of her bill, it is to prohibit ballots from being counted by hand unless prescribed by law. But of course, now you don't have to worry about that because you write the law. So you can't count the ballots by hand. I don't know about these election results. Can we get a hand recount? No. You can't actually see what these things actually say. Don't you trust the machines? Do you think Sia here would lie to you? Her interests are the same as yours. Have fun winning an election. Oh, and again, see what's coming next. And my guess is because of what's happening in Minnesota and not despite it, we're also going to do the home-based daycare fraud thing here in Virginia. So first, 1-2 punch here. First, we have a bill to prohibit the state for checking for eligibility for federal public benefits. You're not allowed to check to see if people are eligible. So this is basically, you're not allowed to check to see if there's fraud. So of course, now there's fraud, which is the point. And again, why would you propose this unless that is the point? And then on top of that, we're going to duplicate the Somali daycare thing now. So you're going to get award of grants. This is from the proposed legislation. Award of grants to licensed and unlicensed home-based child care providers in the Commonwealth in accordance with the requirements of the bill. Well, what kind of people do you think are going to get those grants? Total mystery. But you might get a hint about the kinds of people who will get the grants and the kind who won't. Let's look at the small business and supplier diversity legislation they just introduced. What does this say? Oh, for discretionary contracts under $100,000, if you're a white man owning a business, you're not even considered because it has to go to diverse small businesses. And this is everywhere. This is true of the feds too. When you see things like, why is every rural gas station or motel owned by an Indian? Why can't white men have a small business to do these kinds of things in the communities where they still predominantly live? Why won't white men do the jobs others do? You're not allowed to. You don't get access to government contracts. You're just not considered. Or even if you're not formally banned, you're not connected to an ethnic political machine. And you're not eligible for all these special programs. So even if you do get something, you're competing in a rigged marketplace. Now, already, the Trump DOJ is saying it might intervene here if this becomes law. But again, even if the DOJ does intervene, you're counting on the courts, right? And so if you say, oh, well, a court will strike it down, well, it depends on the race and the sex and the political orientation of the judge. That's all the law is. So who knows what will happen? Now, all this is being recorded on Stonewall Jackson's birthday, certainly my favorite general in the Civil War.
In the army of the Shenandoah, you are the 1st Brigade. In the army of the Potomac, you are the 1st Brigade. In the 2nd Corps of this army, you are the 1st Brigade. You are the 1st Brigade in the affections of your general. And I hope by your future deeds and therein you will be handed down to posterity as the 1st Brigade in this, our 2nd War of Independence. Farewell.
Anyone who knows about Stonewall Jackson knows that he famously taught at the Virginia Military Institute. Now, the Virginia Military Institute was also responsible for basically the last major Confederate victory, Battle of Newmarket, with an outnumbered force, including the teenage cadets, defeated a much larger Union army invading the Shenandoah. Now, what does this have to do with modern politics? Again, the Democrats are serious about politics. What is politics? You punish enemies, you reward friends, you use taxpayer dollars to reward allies, and you deny any kind of recognition or support to enemies, no matter how subtle. One of the things the Democrats did, this is even before the gubernatorial election, but when they retook control of, I believe, the Senate, is they made sure that Confederate heritage groups were not allowed to be tax exempt anymore. Now, again, these aren't really political groups. You're like looking after battlefields and stuff like that. But if you strip their tax exempt status, now whatever sites and whatever they're looking after, they can't afford to do it anymore. They might have to close. Now, they're no more political than, say, like a civil rights memorial is political. They'll say, oh, that's not really right and left. But yeah, what do you think would happen if you stripped the tax exempt status of these sorts of things? Yeah, we all understand what that would mean. Well, this is what they did with these Confederate groups. Now, again, these Confederate groups, these Confederate heritage groups, I don't know if you've ever dealt with a lot of these kinds of groups, but these people are terrified of politics. They're terrified with being identified on the right. These people are not turning out right-wing voters. It's not part of their mission or whatever, but it is still understood by the left that these people are providing something to people who are political enemies. So what do? They don't agonize over it. They just got rid of it. And incidentally, in passing, this just happened. They just introduced a bill to get rid of the Confederate heritage license plates you can still get in Virginia for the Sons of Confederate Veterans and Robert E. Lee. So if you want either of those things, you really need to act on it right now because that's going to be gone soon. But to get back to VMI, it goes beyond mere symbolism. You might remember Ralph Northam. This is the former governor of Virginia. Turned out he had worn blackface during college or had been next to a guy doing it. It was never really made clear. Republicans have this guy in a racist scandal. And they're like, oh, we got him. Democrats are the real racists. No. What did he do? He turned the scandal into an advantage. He turned to the blacks to save him. And he said, look, I'll give you whatever you want if you politically support me. And he did. Now, this guy is going to be on the board at the Virginia Military Institute. And that's assuming they don't just close it. So the Washington Post, reporting on this, says Virginia Democrats target military colleges funding after anti-DAI push. And I quote, the nation's oldest state-supported military college may face losing public funding as newly empowered Virginia Democrats seek to determine whether it has done enough to root out racism and sexism at the school. A resolution filed Tuesday in the House of Delegates would establish a task force with broad authority to investigate whether Virginia Military Institute should continue to receive state tax dollars. I wonder what they'll find. If approved, the task force would probe how VMI has responded since the 2021 state-ordered report found widespread discrimination at the school. It's the latest in a growing push in higher education from Virginia Democrats, who now hold larger majorities in both chambers of the General Assembly and control the governor's mansion. They've quickly moved to reshape how universities operate and unwind efforts from conservatives and the Trump administration to end DEI initiatives. We need to determine whether this is an institution capable of change, said resolution sponsor Delegate Den Helmer, Democrat of Fairfax, who previously forced VMI to protect students who've reported sexual assaults on campus. Helmer, a U.S. Military Academy at West Point graduate, said Virginia taxpayer money should not be given to an institution incapable of separating itself from a lost cause ideology that promotes white supremacy. Each year, VMI holds a ceremony honoring cadets who fought and died for the Confederacy, and VMI, but who am I, and long celebrated Stonewall Jackson, who is a professor at the school. The lost cause narrative glorifies the South's role in the Civil War and asserts it was fought over states' rights. The specter of losing state funding could pose an existential question for the future of the Institute, which in the 2024-2025 academic year received 43% of its budget from the state. Well, why does the Washington Post care so much about this? Why is it reporting on this? Does it have an issue in this? Well, in fact, it does. The article continues. Writing about itself, you got to love these people. The Washington Post published a story in 2020 chronicling a lynching threat and other allegations of racism from black cadets at the campus in Lexington. 2 days later, then Governor Ralph Northam, a VMI alumnus, ordered an investigation into the college's culture. VMI's board appointed retired Major General Cedric Wins as interim superintendent soon after. He was named the school's first black superintendent the following years. Over time, Wins instituted measures to make the school more welcoming for women and students of color. He also established reviews scrutinizing the college's numerous Confederate tributes, but those changes sparked quick backlash at the school. In 2023, Youngkin's diversity chief, a cabinet-level position created by Northam, declared that DEI is dead during an appearance at VMI. Under both Governor Glenn Youngkin and the Trump administration, Republicans moved forcefully in the last year to undo diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts they see as discriminatory on campuses around the country. At VMI, Youngkin appointees voted last February not to renew Wynn's contract. Wynn's later blamed bias and ideology for the board's decision. On Saturday, hours after taking office, Spanberger took her own action at the school, appointing 5 people, including Northam, to VMI's board. Helmer's resolution, co-sponsored by delegates David A. Reed of Loudoun and Fernando J. Marty Martinez, these nicknames just kill me, also of Loudoun, condemns in strong language VMI's celebration of the Confederacy. This resolution would establish a task force filled with members of the House of Delegates, the state Senate, a representative from the state agency overseeing universities, and 4 civilian members appointed by House and Senate Democrats. Unquote. What do you think they're going to find? And they work in concert with organs like the Washington Post. Again, they don't mess around. They know what politics is. And they're not moral relativists. That's easily the stupidest talking point you get out of conservatism Inc. They know exactly who is good and who is evil, who was friend, who was enemy. They disempower enemies. They destroy their institutions. They leave their legacies in tatters, and they give money to friends. That is the point of politics. That's the point of being alive, really. You know, there's this goofball conservative over at National Review. He's not important, but just to make a point, this guy, Dan McLaughlin. And he's over there pontificating, and he goes, we need to recommit both to electing presidents of good character and to a federal government constrained by law. And as Republicans, we have to do it alone. Democrats will never be persuadable to either cause. Well, forget me being, Republican per se, but if we take this as right and left more broadly, why do we need to unilaterally disarm in the full knowledge that the other side won't? Like, what is to be gained? What is the point of doing this unless you actually want destruction for your own side? Unless you actually don't believe in what you say you believe in? Just to show you're a better person under an idiotic moral code? I mean, I'll have no part of it, but many conservatives will. And that's why Virginia is in the state it's in. They fail to preserve the state of Washington and Jefferson and Lee. And if you think you're in a deep red state, a conservative state, oh, I'm in Texas, it won't happen here. Yeah, it can. Remember, every single conservative in the country was saying the same thing about Virginia as a red state just 2 decades ago. It's coming. And you better be ready. My guest today is Karl Dahl, author of With the Crusaders about the Spanish Civil War. I'm really looking forward to reading this one, and also the novel Faction. He has a great Substack over at Karl Dahl, D-A-H-L, Substack.com, and one of the most influential commentators on the Spanish Civil War. He joins us today to talk about it. Check it out. I've enjoyed my guest work for a really long time. Karl Dahl, karldahl.substack.com is where you can find most of his stuff. And he's got this new book out, With the Crusaders, which is a great book about the Spanish Civil War. I'm really looking forward to it. And this is probably one of the most topical ideas that's going around on the right now. Certainly one of the most salient, because people talk about it all the time. Are we in a pre-Spanish Civil War type situation? Because this is the great battle between right versus left. So, Karl, thank you so much for joining, and I'll just put it to you directly. Is that where we're at? I mean, is this basically the situation before the Spanish Civil War in America today?
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me. I would say that it's very tempting to say that we're in a situation that rhymes with the lead up to the Spanish Civil War. And I tend to believe we are where along the kind of like rhyming timeline we're at remains to be seen. A lot of people I feel like are really jumpy and they don't understand that the Spanish Civil War occurred because the right had had enough and rose up both militarily as well as with civilian militias that were organized through political parties, through back channel arrangements, and it took decades to get to this point after several flare-ups of like very significant leftist violence. And so it's kind of hard to say, but there are lessons to be learned by comparing our situation to the lead up to the Spanish Civil War. Absolutely, particularly in that it's fundamentally a domestic war. It's a domestic civil war. We look at it in the Anglosphere generally mistakenly as being in the context of World War II. And that's a post-World War II kind of machination, I believe.
Well, before we get into how the situation is similar to this, just to talk about the history of the Spanish Civil War, I mean, one of the great, I don't want to say it's an irony, but it's just one of the things you got to recognize is that the nationalist side probably couldn't have won without some fairly significant help, certainly from Italy, from Germany, and also their best soldiers, especially at the beginning, tended to be the Moroccans that they got from the colony.
Yeah.
And they were greatly feared by the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting, and those were very important, but it's funny because I also maintain that they couldn't have won if the citizen militias, particularly the Carlist requetés, had not been organized, trained, and armed to a full military standard, like by the time of the war. And in fact, the jump off of the actual war not only was triggered by really important events, such as the kidnapping and murder of politicians by state forces in league with communist militiamen, but also because the Carlist requetés were ready to go. They had enough men, and those two things were the critical decision that made General Franco decide that he would join. He did not join and agree to participate in the uprising until both of those things were in play. It had to happen, and they were actually ready and able to be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Carlist reguetés were, of course, this sort of super Catholic traditionalist militia. Not really, I mean, people will say, like, well, the right was fascist and stuff. Like, okay, maybe the Falange or something like that. But the reguetés were almost like something out of the 19th century in terms of how traditionalist they were. I mean, it's a kind of force that doesn't really fit into the typical narrative of the Second World War. But as far as the civilian militias go, I mean, I've read quite a bit about Spanish Civil War myself, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say they were probably the best the nationalists had outside the professional military.
Yes, the evaluation of the military plotters who were members of the conspiracy, as well as military observers, stated that at the jump off, the Carlist requetés were the only non-official military force that was that could actually engage in like combined arms combat operations, and most importantly, a lot of the army, which had become very decrepit. And
they were pretty terrible.
like swollen. The only good ones were the Army of Africa, which was the Moroccan soldiers, as well as their the Legion. The Spanish Legion, of course, was extremely high caliber light infantry, and trained, and huge veteran cadre. So they were very capable, and only the requetés were really good. And of course, they died in huge numbers. And so by the time the kind of consolidated remaining political parties into a single party, one state, one army, one leader, one party, by the time of the end of the war, like they had serious attrition, but it was still there. And I think they're deeply misunderstood. People focus on the Carlist fixation on a succession. And really that was about the fact that this wing of the Bourbon line was traditionalist and had a patron-client relationship with these people, whereas the succession that won out officially in Spain, that they fought against 3 times in the 19th century, was aligned with the liberalizing faction, which ultimately became aligned with the communists, to be candid, by the time of the 1930s. So yeah, that was really what their motivation was. And I just translated a memoir by the fellow that actually organized and the requetés, and also was doing most of their kind of communications with the other political parties, as well as the military leadership of the conspiracy through Mola, General Mola, who was the ringleader essentially. He basically said, like, look, people think it's weird, but all we care about is protecting Catholicism and our traditional way of life, which is focused on duties and privileges. We hate democracy. We don't want the republic, because the republic is a poisoned pill and it cannot be reconciled with our goals. And that was one of their conditions to get on board, as they said, we will not march under the flag of the republic. And a lot of people don't know this, but it was the Carlist requetés that really secured, and their support, that really secured the right wing, junta being anti-republic and marching under the royalist flag.
Yeah, because there were quite a few generals. I think that one of them was even a Freemason who did not want to bring back the monarchy and did not want to dispense with the republic. They just wanted a more sane republic, basically.
Yeah. They wanted to get everything under control. So they were kind of the centralist conservatives, whereas the Carlists and a lot of the others were just straight up like, we need to batten down the hatches and get everything under control, and that's all that matters.
Right. And Peter Kemp, who was one of the few English-speaking volunteers who fought with the Nationals, he was with the Regetes, correct?
He started out volunteering with the Regetes because it's really interesting.
Catholic.
Yeah, because of he was. They were Catholic. They gave him a hard time about his Protestantism, and there's this really funny element to it. So, in 1936, everyone was just going ham. And so that's the time of the militias, because you can't like join the army in the middle of the Civil War. Like the army only held a tiny amount of territory on the Iberian Peninsula. The territory being held was primarily because of those militias. And the militias, whether they were the Falange or they were the Carlist Requetes, they would, when the uprising happened, they would show up, with the local military leader that they were aligned with, and they would just give it a shot and try to take over these barracks, right? And so you couldn't like go to boot camp until like 1937, basically. And so after they took a huge sweep and connected in the north, or kind of that north central sweep that the Carlists secured, then they were able to incorporate people into the military. And before that, if you had to participate or wanted to participate, it was through the militias, whether left or right, unless you were already in the army. And so the really interesting thing is both the left and the right instituted conscription. The left did it immediately, to the point where like in December 1936, January 1937, like 90% of men between 20 and 45 had been conscripted into the army of the Republic. Obviously, it took a little longer for the rebel nationalists to do that. But what happened is both sides also in early 1937 began consolidating the militias into their military. And so on the right, they did it very differently. On the right, they said, you can keep your symbols and your martyrs and your organization, but you're under military discipline, you're under Army Central Command, but you also get our logistical chain. So the supply chain improved, and it was a good deal all around. Through the end of the war, you can march under your flags and wear your uniforms, but you get all the 7mm Mauser you need. Right. And then the left, it was a cluster, and they spent more time fighting each other over the next year. It was 6 months to a year before it really locked in. 6 months of active conflict with each other, and then it just kind of petered out, and a lot of foot dragging and bullets to the back of the head ensued. And so it went smoothly on the right, because the right is about discipline and hierarchy and order, and they knew that it was this was it. Yeah, because the left was trying to eliminate Christianity from Spain, as well as I maintain, they really wanted to implement year zero in Iberia. And a lot of people just, well, it's a republic and they just liked voting, and, these baddies rose up against them. And it's like, no, the republic was completely illegitimate from the start. It began with a provisional government that was not elected, that had a thin veneer of legitimacy, and then immediately they essentially rejected the fair election of a right-wing coalition in 1934, gave them as little power as possible, and then stuffed the ballot boxes to get the results that they wanted in early 1936 and declared victory. What a surprise.
Yeah, good thing we've never seen that before.
Never seen anything like that before.
One of the things that's interesting, I mean, let's talk about the Republicans a little bit, the Spanish Republicans, that is to say, the left. One of the things that I find really interesting, especially in the early days, is how quickly huge swaths of territory were secured by very small groups of people. Like if you were prepared when it got started, whether you were on the left or the right, you basically set the map for the remainder of the war. 'Cause, I mean, it wasn't a civil war, and it was a coup attempt, and in a way, it was a failed coup. I mean, the whole thing is supposed to be over in like a week, not like years. And one of the things that I think it's Anthony Beaver in The Battle for Spain talks about, and he's got a very big bias toward the anarchists, I think.
Yeah.
But he basically says that the reason the Republicans screwed themselves is in the early going, the best forces that the leftists had were these anarchist militias.
Yes.
And the anarchist militias were actually very effective when they were armed at putting down the coup attempt. But the Republican government, as collapsing as it was, and not knowing who was on their side, in a lot of cases refused to give the anarchist militias weapons because they're technically operating outside state authority, right? And so therefore you shouldn't arm them. But in this kind of a fight where the state authority has essentially rebelled against itself, you need to know who's on your side. And reading about how these Spanish Republicans in the government would refuse to ally with the anarchists and then would end up being destroyed, it sort of reminded me of modern day Republican politicians. Like you can imagine in a crisis environment them being like, well, we don't want to do that because that's not how the system is supposed to work. And it's like, what are you talking about? Look at what's happening right now. Like we don't have time for this. I mean, could the Republic have squashed this right off the bat if they had allied with the anarchists right away? Because if you look at places like Catalonia, I mean, the nationalists expected to take these areas very quickly, and the anarchists basically ran the show for, 2 years?
Correct. Yeah, so I think there's something there. I don't know ultimately. I feel like the inherent contradictions, they were essentially irreconcilable. The leadership of the anarchist. So let me take a step back really quickly. In Spain, politics were generally managed through relationships between political parties and like labor unions, on the left and the right. And on the anarchists, the biggest anarchist labor union and / political party was the CNT. And the CNT was very much, plugged into National Confederation of Labor is what it means. Right. And so they were very much plugged into negotiations between the state and employers and their workers. And then over time, the more militant segment within that population, the super ideological anarchists, formed an organization called the Iberian Anarchist Federation, FAI. I'll avoid butchering Spanish language as much as possible here. But they became a militant wing that in 1932, 33, 34, they were the ones behind a bunch of these pushes for general strikes and various uprisings. And they were the ones that, like, for example, when the dictatorship era ended in late 1930, early 1931.
Just to be clear, for people who don't know, this was Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera's father.
Correct.
Who was the dictator.
Yes.
Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera being the guy who was the leader of the Falange, who got killed off pretty early on. So he was like a martyr in the Civil War, but he wasn't really a leader.
Correct. And let's pin that because there's a really important detail there. So the CNT, when this happened, like the FAI and FAI members and leaders in the CNT, the more militant ones that were less oriented towards just like labor relations and making money off of membership dues, they were organizing like a lot of the church burnings and attacks that happened immediately like that. They didn't wait until the declaration of the Civil War and the military uprising until then. They were doing that out of the gate. Like during the Republic, 1931 to 1936, before the war, there was a ton of attacks on churches and monasteries and destruction of like really important writing and pieces of art and murders and all this stuff. And because these were revolutionaries. And then what would happen is that the Republic would go after the right wingers who defended themselves or like proactively attacked anarchists and such. And
hey, what does that sound like?
It only sounds slightly familiar. And so this is classic anarcho-tyranny. I did a show with Astral on his show, Astral Flight Simulation, where we talked about the Sam Francis piece, Anarcho-Tyranny, and then also Spandrel's Bio-Leninism essay. And then
both of those are just like absolutely key. I mean, Bio-Leninism blew my mind the first time I read it.
Astral plugged them together in such, he approached me and plugged them together in such a sharp way that I was like, we have to do this because of course it fits beautifully into what we saw during the Spanish Civil War and as well as like the right-wing studies of what is essentially labeled Bio-Leninism, by Spandrel, that they found their findings in the prisoner of war camps. So genius stuff there. And the reason that the anarchists were so successful is because in all of these uprisings and attacks and, et cetera, that really failed in what they called the 1934 revolution. Sometimes it was nationwide, but it really lasted the longest up in Asturias, where the army had to come in and put it down. And they had tens of thousands of people imprisoned around this. There's a lot of really well documented material from the CNT and the FAI that Spanish anarchists have done the legwork on and translated into English for free. There's a great one by this guy Agustin Guillamon. He's an enemy, but he's a very good scholar of this stuff, and you can find all the stuff for free online. So he wrote this book called Ready for Revolution, the CNT Defense Committees in Barcelona, 1933 to 1938. Well, the CNT saw the failures of all of this kind of spontaneous uprising, which is a very normal anarchist thing that you see all the time. I was on the streets of Seattle during the WTO protests / riots in 1999, and an anarchist scumbag told me when I was I really hoped other people would have helped because not that many guys could have crushed them if we had just bum rushed, but like you have to burn in advance, and I was totally not expecting the way it came down. But anyway, he told me like, oh, we're gonna, what we want is to get the police to attack like normal people, and then America will rise up and we'll have a revolution.
Good luck with that. That's not how these things work.
That's not how it works at all. But that was what the anarchists in Spain recognized. In the absence of preparation, there is no revolution, quoting, and the more intense and shrewder the preparations, the more the revolution will prosper when the day comes. So they put together a cellular structure in 1934 that they called defense committees, where they created this whole structure where you would create a 6-man team, and one of them would be the secretary who like organizes and coordinates, like he leads, but they don't call it that, of course.
Right, of course.
And then everyone else has a specialty role that they get trained in by a specialist. And it's like investigating people in their district of responsibility, friend versus enemy.
So like the area study that people talks about.
100%. And then there's someone who is a building investigator, where they check out the buildings. And so the idea is the people investigator can like follow an identified enemy, and then instead of getting made, he can split up his duties for investigating these things with these other people. There's a building investigator that checks out all the buildings. Here's where there's weapons and barracks, who lives in this area. Here's the access points. Can we use it for defensive purposes later on? What are the rooftops like for egress and everything? And then you have someone else that identifies strategic areas in the zones, to put together street fighting tactics. Someone monitors public works and services, so for the same ideas, and then someone else sources money, weapons, and equipment. And then as the idea is they become very independent, but then they can plug into the rest of the organization. So when they steal supplies from warehouses, they can distribute it. They manufacture their own weapons, or they become distributors of weapons that someone else is making. They figured out that they needed to make hand grenades. And so they made a horrific grenade that shows up in Orwell's work called the FAI bomb, which is like this. It's a kilogram. It's a very large fragmentation grenade with an impact fuse. And so it became known as La Imparcial because it was like impartial. The fragments would fly farther.
It's a very egalitarian hand grenade.
You could kill yourself with it by throwing it as hard as you could, as far as you could, and the frags could still hit you because it was so powerful. It was made with high explosives and everything. So, they did all this stuff, and that's why they were able to have 30,000 armed, trained, planned men in Catalonia on the day of the uprising. And they were all over the place. And so they were planned and prepared. And other parties would have like small groups of people that were ready to go, but there was a lot of improvisation. And a lot of it, frankly, was because they kind of thought that the Republic would do the dirty work for them.
Yeah, right.
And they did.
They trusted in the state, yeah.
Correct. So to your point, I have an article about the CNT FAI anarchist defense operating concept on my Substack that I think people should read. We can learn a lot from it, purely theoretically.
Of course.
And there's also an article about the way that the Carlist Requete is organized as well. So leaving it up to the state, like the state was really incompetent, and consider that it was a coalition government. That's another thing that's really important. And so when the communists started to assert themselves, it was because they had the backing of the Soviet Union. They were getting weapons and supplies, and their advisors were from the NKVD. And they came in, and really they had no business taking over Spain the way that they did. And so that's where all this conflict arose from, because there wasn't a natural, large, robust, like Bolshevik communist international support in Spain. There just never was. They were always a very small fragment.
They were more like Bakunis in terms of the leftist movement there. I mean, they didn't like the state socialism that they saw developing in the USSR. And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is just something I've seen other authors arguing, and I want to get your take on it.
Yeah.
The communists were the communists, by which I mean the Soviet communists. I mean, a lot of different people were communists, but here we're talking about the Communist Party under the supervision of the Soviet Union, literal NKVD guys coming in and running the show, working on orders from Stalin. They were very good at creating these sort of showpiece military regiments. Obviously, they organized the international brigades, and they were very good at infiltrating the police and the intelligence services and rebuilding state authority in areas that had been taken over by the anarchists.
100%.
But it seems that if you look at the way the Civil War developed, the more the Communist Party built power and consolidated power within the Republic, which they basically did up until the end, the worse the Republic's military fortunes were. Like, they were doing better at the beginning than they were at the end, when the communists actually had very little power at the beginning and had almost all the power at the end.
I think that's completely fair. That's a completely fair characterization.
But why is that? I mean, because you would think, usually, if you look at something like the Reign of Terror, right, during the French Revolution, you say, okay, you look at how it was going when they started the Committee of Public Safety, and it's like you've got rebellions everywhere. Half the country is occupied by foreigners. Everything's going to hell. And here are these guys with iron will and iron discipline, and they basically just execute and purge their way to victory. And then you sort of look at what the Spanish Republicans, I should say the communists within the Spanish Republic tried to do. They kind of did the same playbook, but it just blew up in their face. And all it really did was cause a civil war within the Civil War, which, of course, the nationalists were able to take advantage of.
Correct. I think that the fundamental issue was that there just weren't enough of them, and that takeover created the conditions for massive degrees. The requirement to go along with it would be too much cognitive dissonance. And the jump off, like when we see the propaganda, like when we see like Hemingway-esque propaganda and the people that he ran with running the public affairs for, the English speaking world about these groups.
Nothing has changed, right? These worthless celebrities just getting fooled by the dumbest propaganda of all time.
Correct. And what they do is they portray this, this collective that just spontaneously decides that this is what they're going to do, but you can't really do that. You can't get people to follow the orders of a Bolshevik commissar, because it's very important for people to understand that all of a sudden the Spanish Republic's military uniforms had red rank insignia, red stars, and they put actual commissars, political commissars, into place. And the people that were, if you look at the left political coalitions, they were massively anarchist, or they were just socialist. Like Largo Caballero was
just a union guy when all
he was a union guy. He had worked with the dictatorship and the royal government, and worked with parliamentarians and everything to implement labor reforms, and that's what he was. And he ultimately was like, you know what, this isn't going anywhere. I guess we'll partner with the Soviets. But he immediately knew that it was a mistake. You could tell in his writings and everything, because he knew that the Soviets weren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. And you can't get motivated ideologues to march into guns when you're like, all that stuff that you care about, that's bullshit. And I just shot your leader in the back of the head.
Right. And now I'm in charge. It's like,
and they become very taciturn. And that's really what happened, is that the very beginning, like you were saying, the anarchists, particularly the Durruti column, very aggressively burst out of Barcelona and specifically in Catalonia in general, and ran north up to Zaragoza and other parts of Aragon and everything, because they knew that there was this pocket of anarchists up there that were getting, various things pushed into them by the Carlist Requetés, and they were just getting wrecked. And so they ran north and took a break from terrorizing. The people that followed them would then terrorize after they penetrated any resistance. And they ran up until they just hit a wall, up in the mountains, or in these valleys that could be controlled by from mountaintops. And this is where Orwell writes from. And this is Orwell's there in was it the very end of 1936?
He was with he kind of almost by sheer chance ended up rolling with the POUM, which was the communists hated because they called it Trotskyite, even though it kind of wasn't, but for all intents and purposes. And when you bring up Orwell, what's interesting about Orwell too is that once you know the Spanish Civil War and his experience in it, you realize how 1984 and all these things, it really has nothing to do with communism. It's essentially, it's really just a critique of the left from within the left, especially the Communist Party's like insane propaganda lies, because even a lot of the people who are sold to us as like heroes now, like La Pasionaria, that stupid communist activist, like, she was completely insane.
She was.
The sorts of charges she was making were like, the anarchists are actually like fascist Trotskyist spies working under the orders of General Franco.
Yes.
Like, have you lost your mind? But like, this was the mainstream. And this is what they were trying to sell to people.
And no one believed it. That's the really important thing is that one of the most important things, like Pete Quinones and I have done like 9 shows about the Spanish Civil War.
You can never have too many about the Spanish Civil War.
I mean, honestly, we're always finding something else. We're going to record another one with my Spanish correspondent who has written a bunch of these articles. He wrote one about Dolores Ibarruri, La Pasionaria, and then also one about Francisco Largo Caballero, translated a really important speech and correspondence between him and Stalin and stuff. And the important thing about the Spanish Civil War and the lead up to it is everyone is honest about what they are and what they want. Now, the thing is, though, it's kind of like when you're watching stuff from the World Economic Forum or like an ADL console, is like they think they're just talking amongst themselves, but it's being broadcast to the whole world.
And somehow they don't know this.
And they act like they don't know it, or they're all really surprised that we can just like Google stuff. And so they're like, you gotta outlaw the ability to look up what I said 2 weeks ago.
Right.
They're very honest about what they are, and then they get caught, and then they act like they're these innocent flowers. And there's this really interesting point that Francisco Largo Caballero, in his correspondence with Lenin, talked about, which is that we need to tailor our talking points to appeal to the West. We can't be too overtly harsh on cracking down on, dissent, and we also have to play nice. But the thing is, like, the West knew what was going on, and the Americans and the British had already decided that they were going to support the nationalists. And the very first thing that happened is by the time Francisco Franco is on that plane flown by the British guy, with intelligence connections, because he was an aristocratic Brit. I mean, I have CIA connections. If you count like family members of mine that were in the CIA in like the 60s and 70s. But like, it's just what happens when you're plugged into like a community in a country. But anyway, point being, there are all kinds of accusations will now come out about Karl Dahl. Anyhow,
that was my entire purpose to do this, by the way.
To
expose you.
You got me. I'm also sipping a white monster.
Excellent.
So
good.
By the time
You're okay then,
Franco was on this plane flying from the Canary Islands to Morocco, to Spanish Morocco, this had all been settled. British and American government officials had signed off on the companies that were providing trucks and gasoline and tires, diesel, everything to the Spanish government. They said, well, we have existing contracts. We'll just do the old switcheroo, and we will recognize the nationalist military as the legitimate government, and they will get this stuff on credit to pay us back later. And so that was the decision that was made up front. And here these silly geese are like, well, we're going to try to get the democratic, free world to come support us, even though we're getting weapons from this and advisors from the Soviet Union. And we have portraits of like Lenin and Stalin.
Yeah, it's not like they were very subtle about this, but I mean, there was sort of a dual game. I mean, this is the one thing where I would maybe challenge a little bit, but I want to get your take on it, which is that the Communist Party, of all things, was actually the group saying, listen, don't preach class war. Say we're supporting the bourgeois.
True.
We're supporting the bourgeois Republican government. We are not pushing like the small peasants and the small property owners in the Republican areas. Like they would vote for the communists because the communists were like the party of order, and they were the ones who are like going to keep things from getting out of control. It's these anarchists you really have to be freaking out about. And Stalin seemed to think that he could somehow. His aid to the Republic was way more limited and way more cynical than certainly what Italy did. Now, Mussolini was kind of a megalomaniac and he was just kind of doing it for his ego. But Stalin's was like giving them just enough for them like not to drown, but not enough to like actually help them. And in a way, the Spanish Republic almost doomed itself by not being left-wing enough. They didn't go fully for class war. They didn't go fully for social revolution. They tried to pretend that we're actually a bourgeois republic while simultaneously getting help from the Soviet Union and expecting Britain and France to save us. But of course, Britain and France never did.
Yeah, and I think that's a good characterization. The one thing that I would say is that the French were much more. The French supplied a great deal more equipment, particularly aircraft, and they also let equipment and personnel flow across their borders on a regular basis. They provided, like at the very beginning, they provided a huge amount of, frankly, obsolescent aircraft, military aircraft. They're getting rid of a lot of their old crap, and they allowed a lot of people to go to support the Republic. And so the non-intervention committee, like occasionally would be like, you got to stop, like if we're going to maintain this facade. But they allowed the Communist International to organize and funnel the international brigades through Paris to, across the border. And they ended up having to go through Catalonia because the Carlists immediately shut off the border from pretty much everywhere north of Catalonia. All the way up. Like that was one of the first things that they did in the uprising is they basically made a beeline from Pamplona to the border. Now the Carlists had also been smuggling arms across that border. Keep in mind that Basque country isn't just in Spain. It flows into northwestern France up in that area too. So there was a lot of wink and nod, like funneling of small arms and ammunition and such through those areas. A huge amount of broom handle Mausers came through there in like wine casks, as if the Spanish need to import wine, right?
Right. Well, and the Basques were an interesting thing because I think they regarded themselves as like an ally of the Republic, but not really part of it, because in their mind, and they also weren't as anti-clerical, certainly, as the rest of the Republic. I mean, the Catholic Church, or at least the Basque Catholic Church, more or less was left alone in the Basque country because they thought they were going to get, if not quite independence, but autonomy out of all this.
That is 100% correct. Yeah, that's a really important point. So the funny thing is, Indalecio Prieto is this morbidly obese, grotesque-looking creature who is a socialist politician from Bilbao, but he was not ethnic Basque. His family was from Asturias and moved there. Like one of the key points that I always make is that the leftism primarily appealed to the kind of the deracinated urban populations.
No surprises there.
Of this nature. Exactly. And so the burgeoning socialist movement in Basque country was largely non-Basque. This is something that looks confusing. And so the autonomy campaign that was underway for basically ever since the end of the Third Carlist War up there, the autonomy campaign was primarily motivated by conservatives and reactionaries. And so Indalecio Prieto said that, we cannot allow this autonomy to become realized because it's sedition by Carlists, Alfonsists, which was the old royal line that was deposed. Jaimeists, like he goes through this whole list of people and saying it's a form of sedition, and they're just going to use it to go against us. to your point, the Republic eased off the gas in Basque Country on the agitation and church destruction and everything, because they were like, if we can carve these arch traditionalists out, like, we're way better off. So imagine,
which they did.
And they basically said, we will give you autonomy and we'll allow you this level of autonomy, so that at the jump off, it was considered Republican territory. But they made the conscripts up there made rapid converts to the Carlist Requetés and the Navarre brigades, because all they had to do was basically put on their they're already wearing the red beret.
Yeah, you just wave a cross around here.
Exactly. They're like, we're not gonna destroy Christianity, and they're like, yeah, we hate these guys that we're allied with. So like company level detachments would come over like on a constant basis, and the people who designed the defensive array, sometimes they call it the Iron Belt, around Bilbao in particular, but Basque Country in general, designed vulnerabilities into it and then handed the plans over to
it's like the Death Star over here. It's planned in advance. Here you go.
This is something that you would see little tiny mentions of in your B4.
So that's not actually like communist propaganda. Like,
no,
that actually
it's true.
happened.
It's true. They executed several people for it before the successful handing over the information. One of the engineers that worked on it is this really interesting guy that I had to dig in. So in my research, I had to dig into Spanish language sources, because you're reading these summaries and it's really important, but like you'll see citations or you'll see like 2 or 3 sentences and you're like, that's incredibly interesting. And you look in the English language web and you look for any mention of it in books, Google engrams, and there's nothing. And if you find the Spanish material, like, I can read Spanish okay. I took Spanish and Latin in high school and college, but I had to like become comfortable with it, and then also use a lot of Google Translate, which is very limited in what it can do, especially with older language and regionalism.
Especially with like old military language too.
100%.
Not going to have any idea what the hell's going on.
You run into a lot of issues, so you just sit there with like a really good dictionary, and you go through it. So this fellow, Alejandro Goico Ejea, which is a hell of a handle, he's Basque. He was a royalist, and he was a train autist who was really mad at the Republic because he just wanted to work on trains and go to like these and just do all these interesting design work. And the Republic was like, no, you have to work for the military because you're a military engineer. You need to do these defenses. He calls himself an enemy of war, enemigo de la guerra. He's an enemy of war. He hates war. And so he's forced to, work on these defensive arrays for people that he hates or that hate him. He's all he cares about is trains. He doesn't seem like a hateful guy at all. And so immediately he was like, hey, sending secret messages, meet me, at this pass, and I will hand you the plans, and I'll bring a bunch of guys who want to come over, and we can tell you all about this. And so that's part of the reason that it fell so quickly in 1937 is because they built all these vulnerabilities into it.
Very cool. Why didn't the Republic give independence to Morocco? You would think that would be like the way to really, because that was where the nationalists were getting so many of their best guys. And then, of course, they have to deal with this giant rebellion in the backyard.
Well, they had no control over it.
They just couldn't do it.
They couldn't.
Even if they sent a message being like, you're independent now, nobody would hear it.
They wouldn't care. And the truth is the Moroccans did it for money and for the joy of plunder and killing. So now there's a very interesting point that you see in Republican propaganda early and is somewhat legitimate, which is that at the very beginning of their thrust northward, the Moroccans were committing all kinds of atrocities. There's this legendary story of a Moroccan senior officer like joking to a reporter about like 2 Spanish girls being raped to death. And he just like, haha, they're going to have a bad night. And, legitimate atrocity. That did not repeat itself ever again. There's not much material in it because you have to be like, oh, look how bad Francisco Franco is. But all the real atrocities on the right took place at the beginning of the war, like in the first 3 months, because there was no real central control or consolidation of that control. Everyone had to just go for it with what they had. And so that was not a good look. And they certainly did not think that, Catholics don't think it's acceptable, but they also can't make a big deal about it publicly. And so
this is who you've got.
This is who you've got. And one of the ways that they would punish people who committed these atrocities is, well, guess what? Your unit now gets, because you allowed your men to do this, your whole unit is going to rush into machine gun fire.
Oh, yeah. So you put them on suicide missions. That's one way to regain your honor.
Shock troops. And so that dealt with a lot of that, and it was not allowed ever again. There was still a lot of issues with looting. They would steal stuff, and they would have these camp followers that would just take it back to Morocco. And that didn't last super long. Part of it was the supply trail got really long. They moved so quickly. But the nationalist army was no, come on.
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
On the other hand, they're who are the communists to complain about their stuff being looted?
And to be honest, though, if you think about it, the nationalists recognize that most people in the Republican territory were not part of this. There was a lot of
it was decided pretty early on, which side you were on, but then you were just kind of stuck there. I remember reading
stuck there.
There were stories of if you were a communist behind enemy lines, so to speak, you would join the Phalange just so you were the most right wing, so you wouldn't be killed.
Yeah.
If you were some right wing radical caught in the Republic, you would join the Communist Party so you could show that, no, I'm secretly on your side, it's fine, and then you wouldn't be killed.
Correct. Yeah, and you had to deal with your options, and regular civilians also are the people whose houses are getting looted.
Yeah,
and,
right.
That's not going to do anyone any good. So it's really interesting because people approach this from severely ideological angles, but a lot of it wasn't. It just simply wasn't ideological. Franco wasn't ideological, and
no, he was one of the, other than hating communism, he didn't really have much of an ideology at all.
And he just tried what would work. And really interestingly, a lot of the biggest complaints that the left had about the state of Spain, and the social problems therein, were essentially echoed a lot of Carlist talking points. The Carlism is about duties and privileges, and kind of on the model of old charters, old Western European charters where every social class has areas, this is their responsibility, but this is something that is a privilege of theirs and we can't touch it. Not even the king can touch it. Magna Carta type stuff, right?
Yeah.
And people forget that these go back thousands of years, and they were written down 1,500 plus years ago, but they were verbal before. It was oral tradition before, and it's a really good way to approach society when it's stable.
Right.
That had a great deal of appeal, top to bottom, peasant to lord, in northern Spain, where people were settled and they could live traditionally. And frankly, that's called España Verde, green Spain. It's a pretty nice, livable kind of ecology there. You can do very well as a small farmer. there's a lot of parts of Spain where, farming is incredibly difficult and you're incredibly poor and it really sucks. And so those are the people that feel the most put upon because they have limited options for autonomy. And then again, in southern Spain, they had not had that noblesse oblige because they were, fairly freshly liberated from
Muslims.
from the Moors, and then the traditions were carried on in a way that wasn't great, and it was a real problem. Guess who actually did away with that? Francisco Franco.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that was something that, the Falange pointed out, like, in classic fascist style, like there's a lot of elements to and social problems that the left is kind of right on, but we need to do it in a socially positive,
Right.
respectful way.
Yeah, they want the issue to use it to destroy society, whereas we actually want to solve the problem.
That's 100% correct. And so you saw more of that on the right. And I think a lot of times people, they just focus on the Falange because
But there weren't even that many of them. I mean, at the beginning, especially, they were like a minority of a minority.
I was just about to pivot to that point. So Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, great songs about him, by the way. He, as you pointed out, his father had been the military dictator. He was the figurehead of a government that basically was run without the Cortes, which was a parliament, and they just wanted order. And what he saw was that there was a lot of problems in terms of like right wingers with standing, social standing and wealth who weren't with it in terms of like being ready to address like real problems that threw fuel on the fire that the left exploited, exactly to your point. And so his movement was very small. And in early 1936, there were less than 10,000 members of the Falange. There were about 10 to 12 by the time of the elections in like February, March 1936. And then they were banned by the Republic. However, because they had this structure and a militia and access to arms and supplies, they grew really rapidly at the jump off of the war. They were not nearly as well organized or trained because they had so many brand new members, unlike the Requetés, who could operate a little more clearly. They really appealed more to like middle class, urban and suburban types in other parts of Spain, although they marched and mustered side by side with them up in like Navarre. But anyway, yeah, they were a small faction that became relevant because they came to the party armed.
Yeah, right.
And that was your way that you could get involved in it because you couldn't join the army. So they became hugely influential, but they were like, there weren't a lot of like serious ideologues that were joining the Falange at that time. It was like, this is how I joined to fight. And then, so because they and the Carlists were joined into the single political party that was permitted under the nationalists in the Franco government, their standing jumped. And it's a really interesting thing that all these political parties like CEDA, which was this big coalition that won the elections in 1933-34, but weren't permitted to like really form a government, those parties were gone because they didn't come to the party. They couldn't come to the party when it pivoted from parliamentarian politics to, pew pew.
Yeah.
That was how you stayed and survived and became relevant, is fielding men.
Right. Tell me, getting a little low on time here, and I want to give you a chance to talk about your book. Obviously, who's the protagonist and how does it fit into a lot of the things that we've been talking about here?
So as I explored the Spanish Civil War, kind of on my own after publishing my first book, Faction, which takes place mostly in the 90s, in the United States, there's a grandfather character who I kind of offhandedly was like, he got his start in espionage during the Spanish Civil War. And then I had to kind of say, oh, well, as I study the Spanish Civil War on my own, because I think it's the thing that is most analogous or it has the most lessons for us, I think, in terms of like being rhyming with America. I was like, this is a great opportunity to tell the story, but I can't tell it from the perspective of a Spaniard, but I can tell it from the perspective of an American who gets into this. And I had just read Mine Were of Trouble, and the Carlists like really inspired me. And what I thought was, there's all these stories that aren't being told, through these other stories. And with the right kind of character, which is he's a journalist who goes to Europe for, bohemian glamour and adventure as a young man. And as one does. And he ends up getting assigned there by this Anglo-American press syndicate that is kind of a cover for espionage, which was done very commonly at the time and is now. And because there was an element to like Kemp's book and everything where I'm like, this is an intelligence connection, and he's being handled as an intelligent agent.
100%.
And he's
like he meets with Franco at the end, and it's like, come on, like they're not just going to let some random guy meet with the Generalissimo, like near the end of the war too.
Correct. And so there was a lot of, there's not just the story of the Spanish Civil War, but there's the story of like America and Britain and what they were doing and how they did things then and how they do things now, and a lot of things that people just don't think about or look at, and the influence that this framing has on America. The reason we went into World War II with this very like aligned with England, quote unquote, and the people who really were pulling strings on the English side, you can talk about that with the right kind of character, and you can't talk about it from a perspective that you can't reflect. I can reflect like a guy who could be my grandfather going into this situation, because I can think like my grandfather, and I can think like I understand the world he came from. I'm old enough, I'm Gen X, like I saw that world. And so I can frame the story of the Spanish Civil War in a respectful way to the Spanish and their struggle, and all these different perspectives that we can reflect. And even more importantly for us is like the lessons we can learn for ourselves in our own situation, as well as understanding our own history and why it went that way by telling the story. So that's the story of Faction with the Crusaders. It's really With the Crusaders, but to get that nice title with the Spanish royal flag colors, I had to plug the kind of subtitle Faction in there.
That's cool.
And provide that continuity. So yeah, that's Joe Shea, child of the Pacific Northwest who stumbles into an adventure and is kind of like the right guy for the job through various historical processes. So
very cool. Definitely looking forward to reading that, and I definitely encourage everybody to pick it up. Last thing that I wanted to ask about, because you said it has the most lessons, and this is something a lot of people have been talking about. I remember when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I mean, everybody knows the Spanish Civil War. The thing that kind of kicked it off, and you could say, well, they were going to go one way or the other, but the thing that sort of pushed even some guys on the nationalist side who may have been ready to go to being like, F it, we'll do it live, is when they assassinated that politician who was not a particularly right-wing guy. He was just sort of a center-right politician, and the Reds basically killed him, dumped his body out of a car, and left him there for all to see.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the thing that made everybody on the nationalist side go, okay, we can't coexist with these people. And obviously, we did not get like a giant nationalist coup after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, but you couldn't help but think of that, like when that happened.
Correct.
Because it's like, this is not the vanguard guy. This is sort of the center-right guy. And if this guy's too much for them, what does this mean for the rest of us? So what are some of is that comparison, first of all, a bit too much? But what are some of the big lessons that you would take from the Spanish Civil War? Not least which, of course, if you're in a civil war, don't start another civil war against your own guys.
Yeah. So I think the way I would bullet point it is the politician you're speaking of is Jose Calvo Sotelo, who was a very well-respected, like, family guy, kind of middle of the line conservative type of fellow. But he came to represent the opposition to the left, and he became, Hitler incarnate, as we see now, like normal politicians, always just like Hitler. And he became that guy. And when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I was like, look, guys, the state didn't do it, first of all. And this could very easily put us into like 1919 or 1920 in Spain. It's just the ascendance of highly visible public political assassinations and street violence. And so there was this rumbling which took place that was put down by the dictatorship in 1923. And they basically said politics is over in Spain for 7 years.
Right.
And they just completely cracked down on the left. And to me, what that tells me is that people are too quick to try to bring things to a level that they understand, which is this. And I don't mean this in an insulting way. It's just like limited information. Is that like from the memes, I know that, this is cool and Franco is cool. So where's our Francisco Franco?
Right.
The number one lesson I can give everyone is that Francisco Franco was not in on this until Jose Calvo Sotelo was murdered after several attempted coups, after a successful coup where the right ran the country for a while, after decades of strife and political violence. And when the jump off happened, you dance with the one that brung you, and everyone had to be prepared on their own and then organized. And again, this isn't a call to anything other than like really reinvigorating community. I'm a member of the Old Glory Club. Like, one of the things that we're trying to do is it's a national kind of coalition of individual groups around the country where we just reform community and do business with each other and, recreate a social life that has kind of gone away. The social life, the social conditions that led to Carlism as a thing are long gone in America in many ways, not everywhere, but we can reinstitute those things. You have to have a community to do community organizing. And community organizing is the only way that you actually have political representation and representation when it comes time to do the thing. And there's no one that's coming to save you. Francisco Franco did not just show up and save Spain. Spain had to arise. The Spanish had to arise. Arriba España means arise Spain. It means everyone does it. It isn't your hero comes with a cape and saves you.
Right.
You have to create the conditions, and you have to, the hero is your figurehead. And it's as simple as that.
Karl, I think that's a really good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you and how can they support you?
KarlDahl.substack.com. That's KarlDahl.substack.com. If you want to support me right now, the option is to buy book or buy merch. I have cheeky shirts. My books are on Amazon. You can get there from my Substack. My shirts can be connected to through Substack. My two most recent articles are shilling my shirts. I'm also on X at Caudillo Dahl, but that's mostly just me shit posting.
That's one does. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Here we go again. 2 steps forward, 1 step back on immigration. President Donald Trump, once again, trying to distinguish between ICE raids on criminals and good people.
So they went from not liking me to liking me a lot because it's hard to get. We need people. We need people. It's one of the reasons. I mean, I want to. When you have good people in the farm or good people in hotels and everything else. We want to work with them as much as we can.
If we keep doing this, right? All right, what is he doing here? What is he doing here? There is a reason. I'm not going to show for him, but there is a strategy here. Yes, and, pressure from the business lobby and the hotels and blah, 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 whatever else. But this is also because people on the right and people who supported him, people like Joe Rogan, like, oh, I'm on all the peptides and I'm a tough guy and everything else, but the optics of immigration raids make me sad. Yeah, well, when everyone starts talking like this, it has a political impact. The optics look bad. And then it's like, all right, well, now we have to change our rhetoric. Now we're just getting rid of the criminals. Again, why do you have to do it in this way, though? Even if you're just going after the criminals. Again, the state and the localities won't hand them over because they're willing to go to the mat to keep even the worst illegals in the country. That's how much they hate you. For example, this video going around, I believe this was out of Minnesota, ICE agent being blocked from performing his duties, saying who it is that they're trying to get arrested.
Second reporting, we're here to arrest a child sex offender. And you guys are out here honking.
Oh, we're not. No, we're pressed. We're not.
That vehicle right there is honking and impeding our investigations while we're trying to arrest a child sex offender. That's who you guys are protecting. Insane.
Now again, a child sex offender. This is who they're protecting. Once they knew that, do you think any of the protesters cared? Do you think any of them had a crisis of conscience? Do you think any of them reflected on this and said, are we the baddies? No. Or is the presence of a child sex offender a price worth paying to make sure that America becomes less white? Those protesting ICE see it for what it is at the core, even if we don't want it to be. It's not about law. It's not about making America safer. It is a racial conflict because ultimately it's about who will have political power over the state. If you are against criminals, but you are not white, you are a race traitor and in league with the evil white people. I am not the one saying this. They are the ones saying this. Listen for yourself.
Be a race traitor?
See, again, y'all are throwing race into all of this. Nobody's throwing race into it.
You profile people for how they look. You profile people for how they look and how they speak. Without your mask on and without your shitty little Timu getup, your ass would be stopped by ICE and you fucking know it. You guys tried to detain your own person. Yeah, that's probably because you have the reading level of a fucking 8th grader, my dude. Come on.
Now, President Trump is trying to have a middle ground here. Maybe these distinctions will win over this or that or independent voter, but I doubt it because the media is not going to report it. They don't make those distinctions, and ultimately, independent voters are going to do what the media tells them to do. Instead, it seems like the president's getting cold feet. And this is also why the president is trying to get the media to pay more attention to the people being removed rather than just the optics of ICE raids. This is what he recently posted, for example. Now, of course, the media is not going to pay attention. They're on the side of the invasion. Those who matter when it comes to shaping public opinion do not care how bad the people are that are being removed. And it shows that in many ways, the right-wing talking point of, look, well, they're illegal, they have to go. Already, that seems untenable politically. It's morally correct, but politically, people aren't ready for it, which really should be the final nail in the coffin of the idea that the rule of law is ever a thing. It's about power, and power is downstream from identity. Wake up, grow up. See you next time.